Well, because we are so much smarter than the people from the past, right? Presentism. People from the past were dumb. So surely we would never suppress a better theory than the ones that are currently popular, right? Right? I mean, we're so much smarter, so we wouldn't, right? Right? Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let's talk about presentism, and in particular, how much of a trouble it is with regards to art and science, and maybe some other examples too. What is presentism, you may ask? Well, according to Merriam-Webster dictionary, it is an attitude towards the past dominated by present-day attitudes and experiences. It actually baffles me how a dictionary used the word attitude twice in a single sentence, but regardless. So, I would understand by presentism something a bit more special, a bit more narrow, you might say, even though it doesn't necessarily contradict the definition I just read. So, my understanding of the presentism with regards to this particular video would be something like a discrimination, okay? So kind of like a form of discrimination, kind of like ageism, if you know what I mean. Like, what is ageism? Well, it's assuming that the person has higher or lower value in this particular subject, depending on their age. Like, this person is too old for that, this person is too young for that, this person is too middle-aged for that, I don't know. So you assume a person's value, based on their age. So, presentism is assuming people's value according to the age, like temporal age in which they've lived in, like a historical age. So the basic idea of presentism in this narrow sense is that people in the past have been incompetent. Roughly speaking, they were stupid, okay? So present day people are smart. People in the past have been stupid, okay? Or immoral or whatever. Ironically, by the way, like I'm using this discrimination sort of narrative, the kind of lefty narrative, right? But I'm obviously doing this kind of semi-jokingly, but am I? Because look, lefties are also presentists, and as such, they demonstrate this sort of discrimination, because they say, well, the people in the past were all bigots, you know, they were racists and sexists and blah-de-blah, completely moral degenerates, right? So all the lefties are, because they are progressivists, right, they're about like the progress, they assume that the people in the past have been lower than the people in the present, but pretty much by default. But I digress. So let's return to our actual topic. So, therefore, the age, the historical age at which a person has lived, or has been living, or whatever it is, or is living right now, in case of a present epoch, determines their value, right? This is the presentism. And namely, the present day person is much better, again, much smarter, much more developed, much more civilized, much more, you know, whatever the positive epithet you may think about, than people from the past. And obviously, again, it's based on the idea of progress, that things get better over time. And since, you know, there is no future yet, so we're at the forefront of the arrow of time. So apparently we're the best that the humanity has yet been dealing with, right, in terms of human material. But whatever. See my video, Repent of Thinking, by the way, where I describe this idea in a bit more detail about the arrow of time. I'll link it in the description. You may think about your own posts in the social media, right? If you read what you've been writing there 10 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, it might be a bit cringe, as people say nowadays, right? So, okay, so it's an idea, a paradigm, right? The presentism, the progressivism, it's a way of looking at things, essentially. It's not necessarily the truth, mind you. So let's think about it a little bit. I mean, speaking of truth, it's only an interpretation, right? Watch my video, Nature of Knowledge, where I discuss this in more detail. So sometimes people actually go the other way. They go into completely different direction with the opposite paradigm. So the opposite paradigm obviously would be that the people from the past have been much more smarter, much more civilized, much more developed, etc., than we are. And it's obviously corresponds to this sort of conservative or traditionalist, you might say, approach. Yeah, we'll discuss this a little bit later once more, but what could be the presentists' argument with respect to this? Like, how can they support their own position? Well, they might say, we have memory. Humanity has memory. Therefore, there is a possibility of, reclamation, like each next step in our development would be better than the previous one because we have memory. We supposedly can learn on our mistakes, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, sure, like generally it's a valid argument. How much though? In practice, how does it work? Does it work in practice in the first place? Well, practice shows, I think, that things become forgotten incredibly quickly. Like, we are rarely aware of even the most recent past, like 20 to 30 years. I mean, some of us weren't even born. I think that back then we were too young. Like, I think the average age of a human being on this planet is something like 32. I might be wrong. It could be a median age, but maybe median is even lower. I don't know. But yeah, something like that. So yeah. So 30 years ago, like at least half of the planet, they don't remember it even, right? They don't have this memory. So and plus, human mind is very limited, and all the not so relevant stuff, you might call it, disappears from its perception almost immediately. And plus, there's so much happening in the world in the first place that almost like infinite amount of information, of facts, of whatever, ideas get lost. Again, also not quite relevant, but watch my video about the tragedy of thinking, the recent one. So yeah, the information gets simply lost every second, both because it wasn't even noticed in the first place, or it was forgotten very soon after it was noticed, right? Hence, memory is not really a factor here, especially when we're talking about large scale, like civilization scale processes, phenomena, and institutions. So there could have been, for example, and just as an example, a scientific paper like 100 years old, that the absolute majority of scientists are not even aware of, but which addresses and solves the problems that have arisen right now in some of the sciences, for example. Well, my recent curiosity have been sparked by this Weber's electrodynamics. Like, I didn't know, for example, that Maxwell's electrodynamics is wrong. Turns out it is. And it's been known for, how much is it? 170 years. Think about it. Even before it appeared, actually, the Maxwell's electrodynamics proper. Or Schrödinger, when he tried to fix the Newtonian dynamics for a solar system, and he got the proper value for the precession of Mercury perihelion in 1926. So that was 100 years ago exactly. You don't need general relativity for that, apparently. But we don't know about it, right? We're presentists. Like, we should know better. We know better. Who was this Schrödinger? He lived 100 years ago. Like, we know better. Okay. Returning to the general, conflict, I guess, between these, conservative and progressivist ideas, right? The presentists and the opposite, guys. So, curiously enough, both positions have been present pretty much in ancient times even, and perhaps even before that. So, like, one half of the people is blaming everyone for being decadent and, like, being afraid that the society would collapse tomorrow, Like, I give some examples, my, End of the Western World video. Watch the links in the description. And the other half of the people are claiming, well, okay, no, everything is fine. We're actually like at the very peak of the civilization right now. Like, it's going to be even better in the future, etc., etc. So it actually looks like it's very ironic, right? That both parties have been present pretty much always, considering the very nature of the argument, right? You would have thought that if 2,000 years passes, like, at least one of the sides would conclude, okay, we were wrong, or at least we were right? The other guys were wrong, because, well, in 2,000 years is enough time to figure out whether we're going up or down in our development, but apparently it isn't. So I would say that it indicates that the whole issue, the whole argument is some sort of an archetype, if you wish. It looks like every generation actually has this argument. It's almost like some sort of family issues, daddy issues, this sort of thing. Watch my video, Science and Anarchy, where I describe this this dynamic of how science appeared in this respect, how, a conflict between a son and a father, between, science and religion. So we're dealing with something very eternal in some sense, in this conflict of presentists and anti-presentists, if you wish. Okay, so, and in this respect, once more, this quote by Hegel, history teaches us that, history teaches us that man learns nothing from history, okay? Watch my video, Tier List of Philosophers, where I talk about Hegel a little bit, and also Marx, by the way, who have commented on Hegel's words about the repetition of history, that, first time it repeats as a tragedy, and the second time it repeats as a farce. And I'm curious about what would have Marx said if he had learned, maybe he did learn, but he didn't comment on this, that history actually keeps repeating itself over and over and over and over and over again, in pretty much the same dynamic, just as I've described like a few paragraphs above, like a few minutes before that, about family issues, So let's talk about, give a couple of examples. Like specifically in this video, I wanted to mention art and science. We've already talked about science a little bit, but we'll talk about it in much more detail in a minute. So, how does this bane of presentism, this form of discrimination of the people from the past, works in regards to art, for example? Well, in art, imagine a young person, like a young, exalted, like romantically kind of sort of, in a romantic mood kind of person. They're reading about the geniuses from the past, the great artists, the Beethoven, like the whatever. And they think, oh my God, these people from the past, they were so stupid. They couldn't recognize the clear genius that Beethoven or whoever else was. If only I was there, I would definitely say, yo, Beethoven, you're my guy. Let me support you. Let me give you some money or whatever. Let me help you. Like, I would have recognized that the guy's a genius. I would help him in any way I can, etc., etc. Well, it's this sentiment, right? And you can see it's presentism, the way I formulated it. It's like, we today know that Beethoven is a genius, but that these dumb people from the past, they were too stupid to recognize that Beethoven is a genius. Therefore, if a genius arrives today, we would recognize them as a genius because, well, we are so much smarter than the people from the past, apparently, right? So geniuses aren't recognized. Well, they're ahead of their time, but we are surely so much smarter than the people from the past. We would recognize them, right? Right? Well, I don't think so, Again, see the quote by Hegel, firstly, and secondly, like, you're stupid if you think you would recognize a genius, because again, by definition that we've just given implicitly, a genius is someone who's ahead of their time. Therefore, you are not ahead of your time, even though you are in the present and supposedly is much smarter than the people from the past. Well, you're not much smarter than people from the present, right? And if the genius is even farther ahead, only the other guys, like 50 years later, would be able to recognize, like, whoever is living right now as a genius, but you won't, right? So they would have this privilege, again, speaking in lefty terms, in commie terminology, they would have the privilege of being presentists, right? On top of you, like, you would be discriminated by them, okay? So they would call you a stupid idiot who didn't recognize that, Konrad von Schlachten, was a genius in, whatever he is doing right now. And you never even heard about him, right? And he died in poverty, and only like 20 years later, some old woman has, found, again, old woman, ageism, sexism, okay, simultaneously have found his works on some, in a chimney, like somebody was apparently trying to burn them or something because they thought it's garbage, but this old woman, maybe she had she wanted to decorate her garage with them, right? But then, okay, well, you know, okay, we could have continued pretty long with this. You get the idea, the usual story of how genius is discovered, okay? So yeah, the genius is ahead of their time, so today's genius would be ahead of our time, so we wouldn't recognize them. See the quote by Hegel, history teaches us nothing, it happens all the time, so this exalted young person who is like full of presentism, full of himself, if you wish, like why isn't he actively looking for geniuses right now? Because, well, I'm pretty sure there's plenty, but he's so full of this arrogance that he's only looking backwards, because these are the people he knows he has kind of, he knows, in air quotes, under this presentist agenda, that he knows he has some sort of authority, some sort of privilege in front of people from the past, because apparently, supposedly, according to this paradigm, they were dumb. And he is not, supposedly, again. Okay, so that was art. Hopefully you got the idea. Now let's talk about science. So in science, people say, well, yeah, at least some of the theories we acknowledge today as correct were frequently suppressed in the past, alright? But that was then. It's not now, right? Now we surely know what the truth is, right? Right? Why? Well, because we are so much smarter than the people from the past, right? Presentism. People from the past were dumb. So surely we would never suppress a better theory than the ones that are currently popular, right? Right? I mean, we're so much smarter, so we wouldn't, right? Right? So, and in general, I would say science has it worse, actually, than art, because, well, at least in art, it's, well, okay, I don't want to describe the reasons. Let's just describe why science is worse, specifically. So it explicitly states that now we are smarter. Like, the art only assumes this, because, again, tastes differ, blah-de-blah, but science actually deliberately states. And plus, in art, you know, there's some authority in terms of historical value, right? It also matters. So presentism isn't as strong in art, even though it reveals itself, for example, in the way I've just described. But in science, it's kind of much worse, because it actually explicitly states that the science from today is much better than the science we've had 100 years before, for example, all right? Therefore, there is even less of a window for an actual progress, because it is actively suppressed. So the geniuses in science have much harder time becoming recognized, right? There aren't enough old ladies looking in the chimneys, you know. So the science, you know, the actual progress in science is actively suppressed, deliberately and with conviction, I would say. So that's a big problem. Well, why? Well, again, because surely right now we are much smarter and know what's what. So presentism in science is not just about suppressing the past, because apparently people in the past were stupid, but it's even more so about suppressing the future, if you think about it. Because we can't admit anymore that we may lack certain knowledge. Like, you know, they will always say something like, well, like, you ask some difficult question to a scientist and they say, well, you know, once we get quantum gravity, we will be able to answer this question. Maybe someday in the future we'll get a better theory. Well, no, we wouldn't, you know, because you're constantly fighting against any new theory. It's just not gonna happen the way you conduct yourself, you know, the way you behave as a presentist, as a scientist in the present. You can't have a beautiful garden 20 years later if today you keep stomping on every little sprout you see, you know, and that's kind of the problem of science. That, like, art is presentist, but at least, like, there is some leeway, there is some slack. Now, science is presentist, and there is no leeway. In fact, it overdoes, you know, over-suppresses, because, again, it explicitly states that it's presentist. That it's discriminatory against the past, against all the alternatives, like it's this intrinsic arrogance. I don't know how else to call it. And okay, so that would be all probably. But so with pretty detail, we've talked about art and science in quite a bit of detail, but obviously there are many other examples of presentism, like in many other areas. Politics would be a good example. Like once again, like Hegel and Marx, they talked about politics mostly, right? In the point they were making. But like, you know, every totalitarian regime thinks it's different because it's in the present. So it never learns that it's gonna fail for the very same reasons that every other totalitarian regime has already failed 50, 100, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, etc., etc. Some with the same thing with authoritarian regimes, the same thing specifically about socialistic regimes, about communism. But, you know, and there's a meme about this even, like socialism has never been tried yet, right? Like this time it surely will gonna be different because we are so much smarter than these people from the past, right? So, yeah. Again, I think this presentism is a manifestation of some sort of intrinsic arrogance that human beings have. Again, every next generation thinks it's much better than the previous generations for some reason. And by the same token, every older generation thinks that the new generation is just complete garbage. So it's kind of like, you know, works both ways. Like, old man yelling at cloud, like young people are complaining about their parents and the older folk who don't understand them or whatever. Like I've heard it's kind of different right now. Like the people who are like roughly 20 right now, or even younger, like 15, 10, I mean 10 to 15 years old, they have much better relationships with their parents, but I don't know. I doubt it, to be honest. Maybe they are even worse than what we've had, but I don't really know. Okay. Yeah, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.
If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.